And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, issuesode 6. We're going page by page, panel by panel, theory by theory through Grant Morrison's cosmic conspiracy classic, The Invisibles. Thanks for joining us. Good to be back here. Let's get into it. This is okay. So I say this every week, but this is going to be the shortest one. I promise. We're going to make it really quick because I haven't got much time. And also, this is the worst issue yet. It's also got the worst cover, right? I mean, it does kind of what it says on the tin, and it introduces this motif here. It kind of sets up what's in the issue reasonably enough, but it's just not very good to see. It's kind of boring. And the issue itself doesn't work all that well. There's a couple of kind of wonky bits, basically. I think that it's really interesting. There's still a hell of a lot going on. There's still a hell of a lot we can learn from it, but it just doesn't hang together as well as an issue in itself, as well as all of the previous issues have done. And there's one bit which just clunks, and there's a bit of filler, and you're a bit like, Heh. And because it kind of goes into some reasonably interesting, like philosophical territory and historic territory, you could kind of say that there's kind of a reasonable amount to disagree with here. You could kind of pick holes in this one if you wanted to. I mean, Lord knows what the next couple are going to be like. But yeah, you could pick holes in this one if you wanted to. But we're still having a good time with it. So there's this motif here at the bottom which has been introduced. We get okay. So I would like to jump quickly into the issue, but we can't because first of all, we've got this amazing advert in it. Now this advert for Tech War, the TV series of the book series of the same name, that's maybe the best page in the comic, and like in any comic, right? So we've got Bill Shatner here and Greg Evigan. So this is like my two space cops. The year is 2045. The forces of evil have unleashed a mind-controlled drug called Tech, and if these men can't stop it, the whole world will be hooked. Well, spoilers, they didn't stop it, and the whole world got hooked, and that really happened. Really like the way that I haven't read these books. I definitely haven't seen the TV show. I remember them being famous and around a lot at the time. And it's amazing how I used to think that Bill Shatner looked really old in that photo, and he doesn't. And it's amazing how Greg Evigan without a beard isn't Greg Evigan, just isn't. Like a fashion beard, an 80s George Michael fashion beard, 90s, sorry, obviously. So in the real world, where we live, where you and me live, the forces of evil were unleashing a mind-controlled drug called Tech. And if Greg Evigan and Captain Kirk can't stop it, which they didn't, the whole world will be hooked. And welcome to today. It's called Tech. I really, obviously one of the things that we're finding out as we go through these issues is how much kind of work, and this is obviously one of the themes of this issue, how much like work was being done to construct the world that we live in today, right? The future doesn't happen. The future gets built by all of these very various efforts. And one of them is this. This is kind of like either like some, I can't remember what the name of it was. It Greg Bear? Do I mean that? Or am I just being influenced by the word Greg? I'm not looking it up. I don't care whether I know about tech or not, Tech War or not. But it's interesting that like this was either kind of like warning us about the future that was to come, or just kind of like just letting you know, just like this is what's going to happen. But there are we've got these new kind of mind control drugs which are screen based. But nevertheless, they still just affect brain chemistry. That's what they're for, and they the whole world will be hooked. So welcome. And then we're on to our first page. We are in. It says it very clearly here. It is 1793, the first year of the Terror. A bit later on, we actually get a detail. We can. So there's some kind of like cheaty sort of time stuff going on in this, and it's fair enough because it's just it's just from a narrative perspective, it's just kind of fair enough to kind of mix these things in together, but don't kind of follow this like too, don't allow these sections in, don't expect these sections set in revolutionary France to be too to be kind of all of a piece, because they're not. It kind of the camera eye, the narrative perspective jumps around quite a lot. The furies of the guillotine, les tricoteuses. It's all about these three women here who are kind of obviously, representing like they're called the Furies here, but really they're being more like the Fates, right? In the way that they are using twine and cuttings to shape destiny, to create destiny. These were obviously, this is very famous. These were obviously like real women who did spend their days when during the French Revolutionary Terror, when the guillotine was in the public squares. They would be well attended. Let's not forget how this connects us to issue 2's opening page, where the guy is ranting about elves, about mind control, from Speaker's Corner, which, as we established, was historically comes from Tyburn, where the people were publicly hanged. This is another spot of public execution, and it's kind of a lot bloodier and a lot more short and intense over the the hundreds of years that it took to kind of bed in that kind of sense of state-led justice in Britain. In France, it was done sort of super quick within the course of like a year, and loads more people killed as well, or significantly more people killed. I can't remember how many people were killed at Tyburn over the years now. Maybe not that many more. Maybe a similar-ish amount. But again, much shorter time frame in France. And it's not like they didn't have public executions prior to the terror either, right? But yeah, anyway. So public spectacles, people would go along and watch them. Specifically and kind of like well recordedly, these women who would sit and knit, because you've got to knit. Like these people, everyone's got to wear their clothes. At the foot of the guillotine, watching their heads get cut off, and kind of there's this sort of historic narrative that they would scream the loudest and they would bay for blood, and they were kind of driven mad by bloodlust at the sight of all of these executions. And this calls them, so they're called the liticoteurs, like the knitters basically. They're called the furies of the guillotine. The scissor click of knitting needles as the tireless blades fall and fall again, and blood atomizes in glassy winter sunshine. These are the women who cry loudest at the tribunes, howling for vengeance, for more blood, for more and more executions. Razor hags of the Republic. Now, I'm not saying that razor hags of the Republic isn't like a cool phrase, but there's another word for these women, and it is heroes. These women are what we call heroes. These are the women who spent hundreds of years, and the women like them, women before them, who spent hundreds of years watching their children die, and like within the first few days of birth, and struggling to reach adulthood, and working really, really hard every day of their lives, while the ancien regime just shat in the corner and ate loads. These women were the people who led the March of Versailles. Like literally, these three women that we see depicted here could well have been those who led the March on Versailles and dragged Louis XVI from his very nice palace back to Paris, where he could face justice. I'm not necessarily going to say that it was justice, but at least where he could face the reckoning that did need to occur in order for these women's children to have a better chance of surviving like their infancy, okay? These women were heroes of the revolution. That's what we call them. They're called heroes. They did more to change history than you and me are ever going to do. And for that, we don't call them razor hags. We call them heroes, okay? Especially when we see what our heroes are up to later. I mean, come on. When we see what our heroes are up to later, these people and these women were all right? They're working women who were sick of this obvious injustice throughout their society and went and did something about it. The fact that they are kind of like screaming with bloodlust here, when maybe watching these people die is a bit like, well, do you remember that time I watched my baby die? Or do you remember that time I had to nurse my husband who was was dying of smallpox or something? Or there was, these women came from like pre-revolutionary France, right? They saw a lot of really nasty shit in their lives, and this much isn't that much nastier. So it's really important to remember that Monsieur Guillotine's fabulous machine was deliberately conceived for its humaneness, because the previous executions that women would have gone to see, these public executions, were much crueler, like beheadings with an axe, which could go on for ages, or hangings, which could go on, again, for minutes at a time, causing immense pain and suffering for the victims. The guillotine was specifically designed to cut all of that out and dissolve the kind of the class boundaries between whether you were going to have, a decent beheading, which might, again, with an axe, which might take a couple of whacks and could still be kind of messy and horrible, or a hanging, which would definitely last for a few minutes, at best. The idea that, these women are kind of like monsters for being where they are and doing what they're doing, for making clothes for their children to wear while public executions are going on. We might find it a little bit grim, and it is a bit grim, but they're not razor hags. They're just working women. It's all right. So I think they're awesome. Basically, I don't think that like cutting off 30,000 aristocratic heads is really the way you've got to go. It's a shame that there was this kind of sense of hysteria, which did seem to kind of really take hold, like immediately, sort of in that kind of like early mid phase of the French Revolution. But like, what you gonna do? You're gonna let the aristocrats hide in England, build a private army, and then come back and kill all of you in a couple of years' time? Why would you do that? Like, the aristocrats aren't going to sit by and go, "You're right, we're just going to live in normal houses now." They just weren't going to do that. So what are you going to do? In England, we were well ahead of the game with chopping off the king's head. It was a right laugh, and we didn't kind of chop off their kids' heads. They escaped to France, and then within 10 years they were back. And it's like, okay. And we've still got kings and queens and stuff. We haven't got like a modern state, whereas France has. And also, France has got France has kind of got like a effed up political situation at the moment, and because of the way that it doesn't have its kind of aristocracy burnt into its social structures in the way that we have in England, there are very effective and kind of like vocal protests going on that are going to change again, without the deaths of 30,000 people or whatever, which are again going to change the formation of the French state. And we can't do that here. They can. They've got that power. They've got that freedom. Anyway, I definitely don't think that cutting off people's heads is a good idea. But sometimes, like i.e. then, it's kind of hard to see how else it was going to go. My sympathy for the aristocrats getting their heads cut off. It's just nothing. It's just nothing. I'm sorry, guys. It's just nothing. Wooden needles, shuttle and lock, knitting together the red threads of history. What was I saying about how things like tech war construct the world that we live in, right? Look, a secret pattern emerges. I think this is one of the first bits where the this issue is maybe a bit wonky. I love the art in this, by the way. The facial expressions here are really good. I love this little guy peeking out the corner, cheering on the guillotine. I think there's a bit of a mistake in the lettering, though, because it says, look, a secret pattern emerges. And I think we're supposed... So if you remember from the cover, we've got this shape here, this circle with a line through it. I think this was meant to be the first time that we see the circle with a line through it in the comic. But this placement of this caption is a bit off. I think they should have stuck it... Here you go. I think they should have stuck this speech bubble here, over here. And I think they should have had this caption up higher. And then I think they could have had that caption in here somewhere. Anyway, and then this look, a secret pattern emerges line would have made more sense. Anyway, and they say the prayer to the guillotine, right? This is a real thing. Saint Guillotine, protectress of patriots, pray for us. Saint Guillotine, terror of the aristocrats, protect us. Kindly machine, have pity on us. Admirable machine, have pity on us. This is idolatry, right? This is taking a thing and turning it into a god. And when this thing is kind of like demonstrably, so like the reason that the terror happened is only accountable for by something like a hysteria. Now that hysteria may be called the spirit of the guillotine. It may be called St. Guillotine. Something accelerated not just this sort of bloodlust in people, but this kind of set of like political norms, very sort of rapidly established and rapidly falling away again because everyone was dead. Political norms that meant that this thing was abroad, right? This guillotine was stalking the land. Well, it was in Paris, but figuratively speaking, was stalking the land, and like the logics that were kind of just there in the wind at the time kept ending up here, kept ending up with people getting their heads chopped off. And obviously not all of them are aristocrats. We'll get to that later. But like saying guillotine, deliver us from our enemies. It's a great little poem. It's it's up there with for its kind of like sublimity, for its kind of, and it's like gothic kind of power. It's an example of folk poetry which is, in its kind of shorter, Frencher way, like up there with the Tom of Bedlam stuff that we're familiar with from the previous story arc, right? But yeah. Like what's going on here is that it's difficult to kind of account for it's difficult to rationally account or materially account for what happened during the French Terror unless you add in something like, well, what if there was like a supernatural force that had kind of been cooked up out of human intentions gone a bit overboard and manifesting in things like this. But yeah, so yeah. And that's what the French Revolution was about. So we get this cool shot. Yeah, it's all very ominous and kind of like, gothic and folk horror-y of the sun rising behind the guillotine. And then over the page you could see our heroes. Remember, they just appeared here just at the end of the last episode, of course. And this is our invisible guys. They're on a time travel jaunt from mid-90s London back to Paris in 1793. And King Worm's line here is, Christ, I always forget just how bad the past smells. Which I would say is, the leather trousers calling the kettle black. I think maybe some people aren't in a position to cast stones. Do you know what I mean? Never mind. And they kind of walk through Paris. More just like really lovely incidental artwork here from Jill Thompson. Oh yeah, sorry, didn't do the credits on page 1 here. This is Arcadia, part 2, Mysteries of the Guillotine. Grant Morrison, writer, we knew that. Jill Thompson, pencils. Dennis Kramer, inks. Daniel Vozzo, colours. Clem Robbins on letters. He made a slight error on the first page, we think, but we were going to let it go. Julie Rottenberg, assistant editor. Stuart Moore, editor. The Invisibles created by, of course, we knew this, Grant Morrison. Thank you, sir. Editor. A goat. They kind of walk through the market. I presume this is at the Place de la Concorde. We don't really... Yeah. So like I say, some of these lines are a little bit hazily drawn. The expression on this woman's face here is brilliant. Dane kind of looking at her like, what's going on here? Is, where am I? Am I in a dream? I'm travelling through time. Guy here kind of just like adding to the street noise and kind of hullabalooing at the guillotine while a man and his child here just go about their work. Hopefully there's wine or beer in that barrel. Hopefully somebody's getting drunk somewhere. These kind of the incidental details in these scenes are really nice as they walk through 1793 Paris. Although this is okay, let's get to it. Right, okay, over the page. See, we are going a bit quicker. We're on page 4 already. We appear at this dude here is in the middle of doing like a magic ritual. Issuesodes del pana bata giosel. Easy for you to say, baby. He's basically doing, as far as I can work out, I think he's doing like an Enochian Four Kings invocation. I'm not sure, like certainly one of the Four Kings, maybe one or two of them. But I think each one of these speech bubbles speech balloons that we got here is a one of the names of the Four Kings of like elemental magic. Cracking bunch of lads, I can tell you. And he's using kind of John Dee's Enochian scripts to talk to them. This was like the magic word that was received by the English kind of Elizabethan magician, occult guy called John Dee, and his partner Edward Kelly. They received via like a crystal ball this language, this alphabet that had its own internal grammar and which could be used to call upon angels, basically, like super hardcore, powerful magic spirits. And by using that formula and these invocations, this guy here with his hood on and his gown has summoned the Invisibles. Like, right, he's kind of like almost like the bridge at the other. He's like the other end of the bridge. Like our dude's bridge is in that windmill. This guy's is here, and by opening the channel with his little ritual here, he's allowed them kind of a space to track through. I'm sorry to go back when we were making such good progress, but this is explained on page 3. And we see where we also see, actually, this is a good little detail. We see that over the base of his spine, and that will be relevant in a few issues' time. He's got a gun. Okay, so he's brought a gun with him on the time travel mission. Remember that it's not really them; they're more like psychic projections of themselves. Yeah. And he says what's going on. He says, the King Mod, this is, we just have to track down a local agent. So they mean like another invisible. He should be right in the middle of some kind of ritual, which is going to act as a homing beacon for us. Then we locate our man and pull him out. Oh, I should have said all of this. Yeah, sorry. I was too excited by by Jill Thompson's art to remember the story stuff. When you say our man, darling, who exactly are we talking about? Says Fanny. And he basically says, we're going to find the Marquis de Sade. We're here to locate him and pull him out. We're here to pick up Donatien Alphonse Françoise, the Marquis de Sade. Oh, terrific, says Boy. First time travel, now S&M. So what? So they've come to like rescue or pick up or the Marquis de Sade? Okay. I mean, whatever else you can say, it's not unoriginal, is it? It's ballsy. It's like, okay, I'm in. So the guy does the ritual. The invisibles kind of appear. King Mob makes a couple of kind of lines, a couple of King Mobby lines. Somehow it's always a surprise when it actually works, isn't it? And then they are back in the street on this guy's cart. The guy who's in the gown, the kind of the local invisible guy from revolutionary France, and he's kind of filling them in on what's been going on with the revolution and kind of talking to them and being like, oh my goodness, I've managed to actually, summon some spirits from the future, and now they're literally in my car. And I'm going to drive them around my town, and we're going to show them the sights and talk about stuff. Cagliostro was right then. The teachings of the Invisible College are not simply metaphors. All times are present together. Now, obviously, could have a really good time doing a podcast about talking about Cagliostro. But I don't think we're going to. It's a really good idea for another podcast, actually. But I don't think we're going to, because there's just too... Otherwise, we're going to be here for hours and hours and hours again. But basically what we've got appears to be this guy is talking to our invisibles about his invisibles. So it's easy to... what we kind of construct as we go through, but let's get to it now, is that he's an invisible back in old school France. He's part of a cell in much the same way that these guys are. And one of the members of his cell is Cagliostro. Cagliostro is obviously like this famous kind of alchemist, courtier, stage magician, spy, politico kind of fixer kind of guy, who was famously kind of like maybe had the secret. There's him and he basically mainly had the secret to immortality, right? There's another interesting link. Maybe we'll get to this a bit later. But there's another interesting link which is taking us out into other invisible spaces that we've already come across. All of these little threads that are working away in the background of the book are some of the most fun bits of the book, actually, as we are understanding as we do our little rereads here. But yeah, so Cagliostro is like this kind of immortal, kind of badass guy. What we've kind of got to look at here, I think, is that like invisibles tend to be a bit like rock stars, to not put too fine a point on it. So like in like pre-revolutionary France, or in the revolutionary period, there was these dudes, and to be a rock star was to be a courtier, stage like magician, like in the kind of the stage magician sense, and in the calling up spirits like this guy's just done sense, who would be involved in like political shenanigans, but kind of royal political shenanigans and those kind of like affaires that they used to have. And they would be a bit like rock stars. People would know their names. They'd be written about in all the gossip sheets. And they were obviously like up to something. And history now is very vague about what that something is a lot of the time. Because maybe it's kind of boring. Maybe it's just like, it's probably like Secret Service spy stuff, which isn't terribly kind of, the details were never really made public or were never made available. This kind of air of mystery builds up around these things. But they were probably just, like I say, they were like political fixes, like moving information around Europe to get stuff done, okay? Illuminatis, basically, but not quite. We'll get to that later. We'll get to those guys. Get to those guys later as well. Like, yeah, I didn't realise couldn't remember maybe just how much this comic could just be called the Illuminatis, and and still be the same comic. And we're kind of told exactly as much as that in the letters pages later. Afraid not, says King. So he says, well, there are so many things I wanted to ask you. I thought I'd summoned the secret chiefs of the order. The secret chiefs maybe being the 4 kings? Yeah, the 4 elemental kings. Afraid not, we're just toilers in the vineyard, same as you, Etienne. And this guy's got a name, and it's called Etienne. Now, I don't know why we aren't told who this guy is, because we're told that Cagliostro's around, even though we don't see him. We're told that we find out in a bit some of the other names of the members of Etienne's cell. But what we're learning... Oh, sorry, yeah. Okay, so after these guys were like the rock stars of their age, when the fashions changed over the next like quarter of a century, and kind of romantic poets became the rock stars of the age, like Byron and Shelley, who we saw last episode, yeah? So it's almost like the Invisible College, as it kind of was called back in the olden days before we decided to come up with the snappier name of just the Invisibles, they were, for a bit, they were like these kind of like, Europe trotting spy guys, like kind of spooky spy guys. Then they became a bit more just like that. Their job role became a bit more beveled down to being sort of superstar poets like Byron and Shelley. Shelley was like a bit more indie, obviously, whereas Byron was just obviously, like the main attraction, a big blockbuster style star. Then if we think that we saw the blank badge on John Lennon in the 1960s, and then here we are in the 1990s, and Invisibles are people like this, right? We've got like, we've got our guys who we know, okay? And for the first time we see Dane here. He's sat in the back of this smelly cart, and he doesn't look well. Now remember back in the, but he looks fine here. He looks okay here. We saw him looking a little like he's obviously a bit freaked out by this whole situation, as we saw previously. But he seems all right up until this point, and now he's got these bubbles around his head, and it's like he's not okay. I remember he was drunk, but these aren't those bubbles. These aren't the happy drunk bubbles that he had in the last issue. These are like maybe hungover bubbles or bad kind of orbs hovering around him, sucking on his life force or something. But they're kind of he's not looking great. Now I reckon only this guy called in the 4 kings, and what happened in his little ritual, and what happened was 5 people turned up. The people that he's calling up are the elemental kings, right? So each one is like an element. I think we learned from Boy last week that invisible cells are built on elemental symbolism. So like earth, air, fire, water, and spirit is like the 5th unifying element. The 4 kings are the first 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and they don't kind of count for spirit. That's actually provided by the magician in the scheme, right? He's the spirit. So really, this guy did a ritual, called up 4 beings, and 5 arrived. So something's a bit wrong. Okay, did you get that? So if you call up 4 things and 5 turn up, something's gone a bit off. And I think that might be one of the reasons, as well as him having been drunk in the real world, and that kind of maybe dehydrating and hangovering him, might be why Dane is not feeling too good here. That's another reason. But there's this. It's interesting, right? So like magic these days often kind of goes into territory where like excesses of energy are kind of more permissible. But in these kind of like 90s third waysy managerialist centristy times, there was very much about kind of causing the mood was about causing a stability and about a kind of a balancing of forces. Right now, that excess of force and energy is kind of written about as if it's the point of magical work. Right, you're pushing the universe in your way. You're not just kind of trying to find out what the universe's ideal balance is and doing your part to that. We're in a situation now where the world is dying, right? So it's incumbent upon ye goody witches to create excesses of energy and move things into the way that you want them to go, rather than to seek to achieve balance, when we know that the balance that we've got, or balance, isn't balanced at all. It's just destructive within a particular direction, right? And we've got to jump on the scales and knock them back the other way a bit. And that isn't about creating balance. That's about pushing in your direction. But this was the 90s, and so when you depict magic, like in Buffy or whatever, there's always this big deal about the scales balancing on either side, and it's a bit like, well, maybe that's not quite so much the thing. Doodle-doodle. So this guy Etienne. So King Mob definitely says his full name Etienne, and I don't know why we aren't just told a bit more. So we know who Byron and Shelley are, we know who Cagliostro is, we know who John Lennon is, but we don't know who this guy is. So all of the other invisibles that we kind of are given cause to know, this guy, so you find out, right? You flip and Google it and you find out. So this guy is Etienne Mehul, who was born in 1763 and would die in 1817. He was a composer in revolutionary France. He wrote operas. I am literally 100% convinced that this is who this guy's meant to be, and I don't quite know why it's not just said. And part of the reason why is because this is the Invisibles, and as we know, some of the most important things that are happening in this comic are invisible within the fabric of the comic. It's not really there. It is really there, but we're not shown it. So, Bobsy, why are you so sure that this is Etienne Mehul? Because he looks like him. If you look at this picture here, we know how good Jill Thompson is with faces, right? If you look at this picture here, there's just something in that snubby nose and this little curve there, which looks quite. This is the panel bottom left on page 5. He just looks like that's. It just looks like someone's had another. It looks like the art that Jill Thompson has had another go at just making sure it looks a bit like that for some reason, like it's modelled on a real person. Now I don't know why we aren't told that it's just Etienne Mehul, but look it up yourself. Etienne, Etienne, French for Stephen. Mehul, Mehul. There's plenty of contemporary portraits of him because he was famous. He's like the French Beethoven. He's obviously not very well known in the English-speaking world, and that's maybe why he's not. That's probably the reason why he's not kind of like named as being like in it. But he is pretty obscure in the UK, and we're learning here that he was kind of not just like a mason, but like an illuminated mason. He was an invisible, basically. Moving on to page 9, over the page from the advert, we are back in London in 1995. We have this kind of like serial killer, kind of like murder scene shot of Orlando about his business. Remember, we're kind of positing that Orlando is like a control mechanism by which the baddies, I guess you'd call them, the forces of control and order are maintain that control through tactically applied violence, but also by blood sacrifice. Yeah, we've obviously there's a lot of blood sacrifice going on in this episode right here. What this really contrasts with is the we presume this is the family that he bumped into in the park, because they've got this. There's this nice domestic scene, but there's the head of a boy on a spike. There's the hand of a baby. This is very like 90s serial killer chic here, for want of a better word. There's a kind of there's a woman's body. There's the song "Here We Go Round Them," like "Pop Goes the Weasel" is playing on the record player. Another like a David Lynch twist of like the serial killer that plays music. Well, it's not just David Lynch, obviously, but he does it to most scary effect in Twin Peaks season 2, sorry, technically. What we've got here, and this kind of domestic scene of massacre and murder. Oh, in fact, we can totally tell that it's the scene from earlier because the ice cream cone. So it is the same family that was killed that he met in the park earlier. So like the baddies do private acts of violence. The goodies, well, not the goodies, but like the revolutionary forces, the Invisibles, who remember thought they were in control of the French Revolution, but then found out maybe they weren't, do public acts of violence. That's kind of what's going on here, I think. So we've got. I think that's what the point here is. Pop Goes the Weasel It's playing because it's creepy. Because nursery rhymes, like kids' songs, are creepy. Pop Goes the Weasel dates back to around the 1850s, we think. And it appears to be about money and loss, debt. Like Weasel and Stoat is coat, and you pawn your coat when you've run out of money for that month or week or whatever. You need to lay down some, like, work up some more cash, so you pawn your winter coat. Pop Goes the Weasel, and then you redeem it later when you found some more money. So that's kind of it, and obviously that process, that kind of a need to earn a crust and to support, to kind of do social reproduction, domestic reproduction, is the kind of the source of anxiety and pain. It was the thing that drove the tricoteurs, the bread prices famously, to kind of do their revolution. We've got revolution getting stuck here, and we've kind of got the impact of revolution, or the kind of we've got blood revolving within a domestic setting rather than in a public one. On to page 10. We've got another cool face here from Jill Thompson. She does love her kind of background grotesques. I think the kind of the gargoyles thing, being that we're in Paris, is quite the thing. Etienne Mehul is giving them more stuff. They're talking about Notre Dame being kind of turned into a temple to reason, with the slogan "Death is asleep forever" above the lintel. So heaven disappears because utopia is promised here on earth. He kind of laments the size of the mountains of corpses. They call it the sword of liberty. God's name, mon Dieu. I hope the future's better than this. King Mob is still got the image of the thing that he saw in the among the gargoyles up in the rafters of Notre Dame on his mind, so he asked about those. And Etienne tells them about these shadow spirits, like big insects that are kind of seen to be feeding in the carnal house of the innocents. I'm not sure the carnal house of the innocents was used for that much revolutionary burial. I think that was kind of done a bit out of town, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. 1,000 people are being guillotined every month, and their bodies are dumped in deep ditches. I think those deep ditches were not in the carnal house, like the famous kind of like burial ground within Paris of the time. This is a very grim sight. Obviously, the kind of the blood that's captured is poured into these trenches too. The blood that's captured from the severed necks, and then these guys are seen to be feasting on the blood, like giant insects. Some certain nights, a full moon night, as we're given to see here. Citizens claim to have seen hideous black shapes prowling the graveyards, digging in the corrupted dirt. We're kind of at the start of the terror a bit, really. Remember, we're in January 73. So I think, I'm not sure how much of this would have happened yet. This perspective that Etienne is giving us seems to be from one which would be more into June, July of the year, I think. But anyway, let's not fuss about that too much. The smell is enough to send the brains reeling. I've heard say that the dead are being visited by things like insects, giant insects. It's a good, creepy image, obviously. Black shapes prowling the graveyards, digging in the corrupted dirt. King Mobs says, Cyphermen, shit. These appear to be Cyphermen, who are kind of baddie agents, basically, who can also do the time travel thing. Humans who've been modified by high-frequency subliminal transmissions. The signals suppress individual thought and encourage hive mind loyalty. Japanese corporations use them on office workers. Nice little bit of casual racism there. Because Asian people are like drones, aren't they? Jack is tells him to shut up, basically getting back his casual racism for telling him off for his casual racism, perhaps in the same way that he told Dane off for his casual homophobia in the last issue. And then he goes, still, I suppose it gives me a chance to use this bastard. Disrupts the integrity of psychic projections. I call it the Ghostbuster. King Robber's got like a sci-fi gun that works on psychic projections, a psychic gun. basically. He calls it the Ghostbuster. Difficult to stress how distant in time Ghostbusters, a film which had come out like a decade before this, seemed at the time. But it seemed to belong to a very different era. Certainly, yeah, that's just me. That's me. The difference between me being a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old. But to see the word Ghostbuster was like, oh my God, that's like a reference to Ghostbusters. Do you remember that film? Now, one finds it difficult not to remember Ghostbusters. It's kind of just, anyway, it's kind of just too bric-a-bracy, right? It's just too much of a touch point for our kind of conceptually sort of evacuated times and our culture which seeks to eat itself again and again. Over the page, on page 12, we are introduced to the Marquis de Sade. He looks like Harmar Superstar. Do you remember Harmar Superstar from Electro Clash in the early noughties? Do you remember that? He's here at the hospital. Oh my goodness, I didn't write down what it was called, did I? He was given they're at a hospital. I can't remember that. Okay, I'm going to look this up actually before my next recording tranche to find out what the name of the hospital that de Sade was working in at the time. But he was at this time kind of released from his like life in prison stroke, mental hospital, psychiatric treatment. Because he was posh and rich, he was given, I'm sure that like the places that he was living in were horrible, but he was given very kind of gentle treatment for the massive act of sadism that he perpetrated and that kind of got him locked up. I don't know if this is the right page to go into it, but you know how like earlier when I was calling les tricoteuses, when I was calling them heroes, these women are sitting and making clothes for children while witnessing the historic process that they've helped set in motion, and they're not pretending that this blood isn't happening. They are absolutely living in it. They're not looking away. They're consciously being aware of it happening at them, happening for them, happening because they've made it happen. And the Invisibles rock up and they're like, but we've got to rescue the ghost of the Marquis de Sade. And it's just like, what? You're not. You're what? What? It's not. The Marquis. Okay, so the Marquis de Sade's work. Okay, really simply, it's literally separating the art from the artist. That's what this whole mission is about, right? The Marquis de Sade's kind of writings and thought were really important in the kind of the history of late Enlightenment thought. The way that he locates the political subject back in the body is incredibly important to the way we understand politics today. The way that he opened up new territory for talking about sex and stuff is obviously, and sexuality is incredibly important. But the guy was a piece of shit. His socialism, as it was, his radical democracy, or his radical democratic political outlook, which kind of put him on the right side of the revolution, stopped him from getting his head cut off, was sound because he was just kind of smart and aware of his own, aware of the hypocrisy. Moving on to page 9, over the page from the advert, we are back in London in 1995. We have this kind of serial killer kind of murder scene shot of Orlando about his business. Remember, we're kind of positing that Orlando is a control mechanism by which the baddies, I guess you'd call them, the forces of control and order are maintain that control through tactically applied violence, but also by blood sacrifice. Yeah, we've obviously, there's a lot of blood sacrifice going on in this episode right here. What this really contrasts with is the we presume this is the family that he bumped into in the park, because they've got there's this nice domestic scene, but there's the head of a boy on a spike. There's the hand of a baby. This is very 90s serial killer chic here, for want of a better word. There's a woman's body. There's The song "Here We Go Round Them," like "Pop Goes the Weasel," is playing on the record player. Another like a David Lynch twist of like the serial killer that plays music. Well, it's not just David Lynch, obviously, but he does it to most scary effect in Twin Peaks season 2, sorry, technically. What we've got here, and this kind of domestic scene of massacre and murder. Oh, in fact, we can totally tell that it's the scene from earlier because the ice cream cone. So it is the same family that was killed that he met in the park earlier. So like the baddies do private acts of violence. The goodies, well, not the goodies, but like the revolutionary forces, the Invisibles, who remember thought they were in control of the French Revolution, but then found out maybe they weren't. Do public acts of violence. That's kind of what's going on here, I think. So we've got. Yeah, I think that's what the point here is. Pop Goes the Weasel. It's playing because it's creepy. Because nursery rhymes like kids' songs are creepy. Pop Goes the Weasel dates back to around the 1850s, we think, and it appears to be about money and loss, debt. Like Weasel and Stoat is coat, and you pawn your coat when you've run out of money for that month or week or whatever. You need to lay down some, like, work up some more cash, so you pawn your winter coat. Pop Goes the Weasel, and then you redeem it later when you found some more money. So that's kind of this, and obviously that process, that kind of a need to earn a crust and to support, to kind of do social reproduction, domestic reproduction, is the kind of the source of anxiety and pain. It was the thing that drove the tricoteurs, the bread prices famously, to kind of do their revolution. We've got revolution getting stuck here, and we've kind of got the impact of revolution, or the kind of we've got blood revolving within a domestic setting rather than in a public one. On to page 10, we've got another cool face here from Jill Thompson. She does love her kind of background grotesques. I think the kind of the gargoyles thing, being that we're in Paris, is quite the thing. Etienne Mehul is giving them more stuff. They're talking about Notre Dame being kind of turned into a temple to reason, with the slogan "Death is asleep forever" above the lintel. So heaven disappears because utopia is promised here on earth. He kind of laments the size of the mountains of corpses. They call it the sword of liberty. God's name, mon Dieu. I hope the future's better than this. King Mob is still got the image of the thing that he saw in the among the gargoyles up in the rafters of Notre Dame on his mind, so he asked about those. And Etienne tells them about these shadow spirits, like big insects that are kind of seen to be feeding in the carnal house of the innocents. I'm not sure the carnal house of the innocents was used for that much revolutionary burial. I think that was kind of done a bit out of town, but maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. 1,000 people are being guillotined every month, and their bodies are dumped in deep ditches. I think those deep ditches were not in the carnal house, like the famous kind of like burial ground within Paris of the time. This is a very grim sight. Obviously, the kind of the blood that's captured is poured into these trenches too. The blood that's captured from the severed necks, and then these guys are seen to be feasting on the blood, like giant insects. Some certain nights, a full moon night, as we're given to see here. Citizens claim to have seen hideous black shapes prowling the graveyards, digging in the corrupted dirt. We're kind of at the start of the terror a bit, really. Remember, we're in January 73. So I think, I'm not sure how much of this would have happened yet. This perspective that Etienne is giving us seems to be from one which would be more into June, July of the year, I think. But anyway, let's not fuss about that too much. The smell is enough to send the brains reeling. I've heard say that the dead are being visited by things like insects, giant insects. It's a good creepy image, obviously. black shapes prowling in the graveyards, digging in the corrupted dirt. King Mob says, Cyphermen, shit. These appear to be Cyphermen, who are kind of baddie agents, basically, who can also do the time travel thing. Humans who've been modified by high-frequency subliminal transmissions. The signals suppress individual thought and encourage hive mind loyalty. Japanese corporations use them on office workers. Nice little bit of casual racism there. Because, Asian people are like drones, aren't they? Jack is tells him to shut up, basically getting back his casual racism for his telling him off for his casual racism, perhaps in the same way that he told Dane off for his casual homophobia in the last issue. And then he goes, still, I suppose it gives me a chance to use this bastard. Disrupts the integrity of psychic projections. I call it the Ghostbuster. King Mob has got a sci-fi gun that works on psychic projections, a psychic gun, basically. He calls it the Ghostbuster. Difficult to stress how distant in time Ghostbusters, a film which had come out a decade before this, seemed at the time. But it seemed to belong to a very different era. Certainly, that's just me. That's me. The difference between me being a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old. But to see the word Ghostbuster was oh my God, that's a reference to Ghostbusters. Do you remember that film? Now, one finds it difficult not to remember Ghostbusters. It's kind of just, anyway, it's kind of just too bric-a-bracy, right? It's just too much of a touch point for our conceptually sort of evacuated times and our culture which seeks to eat itself again and again. Over the page, on page 12, we are introduced to the Marquis de Sade. He looks like Harmar Superstar. Do you remember Harmar Superstar from Electro Clash in the early noughties? Do you remember that? He's here at the hospital. Oh my goodness, I didn't write down what it was called, did I? He was given they're at a hospital. I can't remember that. Okay, I'm going to look this up actually before my next recording tranche to find out what the name of the hospital that de Sade was working in at the time. But he was at this time kind of released from his life in prison stroke, mental hospital, psychiatric treatment. Because he was posh and rich, he was given, I'm sure that the places that he was living in were horrible, but he was given very kind of gentle treatment for the massive acts of sadism that he perpetrated and that kind of got him locked up. I don't know if this is the right page to go into it, but you know how earlier when I was calling les tricoteuses, when I was calling them heroes, these women are sitting and making clothes for children while witnessing the historic process that they've helped set in motion, and they're not pretending that this blood isn't happening. They are absolutely living in it. They're not looking away. They're consciously being aware of it happening at them, happening for them, happening because they've made it happen. And the Invisibles rock up and they're like, but we've got to rescue the ghost of the Marquis de Sade. And it's just what? You're not... what? What? It's not... the Marquis... Okay, so the Marquis de Sade's work... Okay, really simply, it's literally separating the art from the artist. That's what this whole mission is about, right? The Marquis de Sade's kind of writings and thought were really important in the kind of the history of late Enlightenment thought. The way that he locates the political subject back in the body is incredibly important to the way we understand politics today. The way that he opened up new territory for talking about sex and stuff is obviously, and sexuality is incredibly important. But the guy was a piece of shit. His socialism, as it was, his radical democracy, or his radical democratic political outlook, which kind of put him on the right side of the revolution, stopped him from getting his head cut off, was sound because he was just kind of smart and aware of his own, aware of the hypocrisy of his immediate situation, in being somebody who could wield such kind of unjust power over other people in the way that he was allowed to abuse other people. But like he was a piece of shit, and it was class power that he used to it was like servants and children that were kind of had no recourse to justice whatsoever because of his social class that enabled him to kind of indulge his sadistic passions. He wasn't the first sadist in history, goodness knows. We've always had them. The fact that he was able to kind of theorize and give a name to it is obviously really culturally and historically important. He is like an important figure in history, but like the way that this comic like locates that importance back in the body of the man himself, and kind of turns him into a bit of a hero when even if you're very generous about the fact that he was basically a massive like paedophile, even within like a modern sort of like context of looking at how you might might be liberal towards his like sexual proclivities and like I say fucking paedophile. There's the class thing which I can't get away from. Like he would abuse sex workers and servants and people who had with whom there was no equality of power whatsoever. They were property to him, and he abused them. And I think that kind of trying to rehabilitate him as a cool guy instead of his work, I think that's misguided. I just think it is. I just think it's kind of like I think there's a ethic failing there. I think there's bad morals. But we got to meet him here. He's funny because he's fat and angry. Because fat people are funny, I guess. This is another bit of a lapse here. There are some definite problematizes going on in here in this issue. So he's kind of doing some but yeah, because he was on the right side of the revolution, he was given a job and was put in charge of like hospital admin. And this is him kind of shouting about how terrible the situation in the hospitals is, which again makes you realise how necessary the revolution is in a way, but also taints it, right? And then everybody acts shocked because they've seen a rat. They live in 1790s Paris. I think they've seen rats. Anyway. And then there's a noise in the next room, and he sees some Cyphermen in the flesh this time, not as a flashback or a story, but they're actually there, and they've got a woman's body, and she's all opened up and carcass, and they're kind of like poking around in her innards, and it's horrible. Cut scene change, and we jump back to Mary Shelley and the nameless stranger with the apple, who are in the post carriage, travelling to Venice. He says, I've finished reading Frankenstein barely 2 weeks ago. He really liked the book. He's a fan. And she's like, yeah, thanks, man. That's great. He's on, and he's like, and I have read your mum's work, Mary Wollstonecraft. And he says he met her 25 years ago during the Terror. So when all of this is going on, back in Paris, obviously remember we're about 25 years later now, we're in 1818 or so. This guy met her when she was living with Gilbert Imlay, living with the American. He was a piece of shit, my goodness. He was obviously a spy again, doing kind of work for the nascent American state, using the kind of the well-documented networks, illuminist networks, one might say, running between Paris and America at the time, or France and America at the time. Imlay was obviously a total cad, up to no good at all. That his and Mary Wollstonecraft's child, Fanny, had a terrible life because of the abandonment from her by her father and the early death of her mother. The guy, the stranger, goes on to mention her father, Godwin, and her current husband, and her husband now, Shelley. I don't even know if they were actually married, but I think they were. But by this point. And he says, I'm older than I appear, because obviously he's been around a lot to have met her mum 25 years ago. It's quite clear by now who this guy is. I mean, this is he's doing all of the, he's ticking off all of the My features do not bear the marks of what I have seen and done. I have been lucky. I am older than I appear, Mrs. Shelley. It's obvious who this guy is now. The matrix of the Shelley, Godwin, Wollstonecraft, Imlay, Byron people, families, and particularly their children, is horrible. A real mess. Like a real mess. They were plagued by not just like infant mortality, but by like suicide. It was a terrible scene, and this was partly, they were kind of sacrificing themselves, while we're here talking about blood sacrifice, in order to create a new type of sort of social balance, like a way that people could be in the world when it related to, love and the family, and without the kind of the models that they laid down. Remember, this takes us back to, I haven't even mentioned this, but there's a connection here between Cagliostro and Saint-Germain, and Godwin and Wollstonecraft, and Emanuel Swedenborg, who was the kind of the religious inspiration for Blake. This does all tie up back to the previous story arc, through the figure of Blake and these other romantics who we're looking at now. Because Cagliostro and Saint-Germain, or Cagliostro particularly, I think it was, there's a guy called Bevshem, was it? Like a kind of a Jewish mystic who was big news in London at the time, and who Cagliostro learnt from, and who also taught Swedenborg, who taught Blake. Right, these silver chains are real things that definitely link up in these figures, who maybe are only being mentioned in passing, but are really kind of letting themselves be felt within the fabric of this comic. Yeah, they kind of, they had family arrangements which we wouldn't think were too unusual now, but it cost them a lot. Like they really suffered for it, because society wasn't prepared to accept what we would consider to be fairly, not too outrageous living situations and family situations now. Not too outrageous, just normal, really. And that's awful because these children bore it, basically. But let's cover that next week. Let's cover that next time. He remarks that this one is very quiet. This baby, yes, they are. They're off. Mary says, "Yeah, we're going to Venice to visit my husband and Lord Byron. Our schedule is quite grueling and the weather very hot. The journey is rather long for such a small child." And then he goes, "Yes, tell me, have you heard of the Invisible College?" Ta-da! Okay, so is this guy an invisible? Is Mary Shelley an invisible? Like, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but like, if you think about the people who are in the, I did mention it last time, the invisible cell of people who were in the villa on the side of Lake Geneva about 3 years before this scene took place, where they cooked up Frankenstein for themselves. Yeah, cooked up this modern Prometheus, among some other things. But that was like the big working that they did in the dreary villa that summer, in the villa that dreary summer, perhaps. And she says, "I have heard of them. I have heard that they are a secret society of Rosicrucians and Illuminists dedicated to the ideals of liberty. Some say that these invisibles were the secret power behind the revolutions in America and France. Why do you ask?" And he says, "Well, because we do need these invisibles to create better worlds for us, but they get their fingers burnt like Prometheus." And she says, "You have not told me your name, sir." And he says, "No, I have not." Because he's the devil, right? Because that's kind of how he rolls. This is all of his stuff. You meet him on the road. He is, charming and well dressed and of indeterminate age, and doesn't give you his name, but does give you an apple, which Shelley has somewhat unwisely eaten at least half of. So the Invisible College kind of come as a term, generally refers to these days to kind of any group of scientists working on, a particular paradigm, particularly new paradigms. They have to kind of fly under the radar a little bit if they've got ideas which are too radical to share, because other scientists, this is just science, sociology, are desperate to tear down anybody else who comes up with an idea that maybe threatens the stuff that they've been talking about in their books. It comes from like Francis Bacon, like the kind of the early English Renaissance scientist and his Invisible College within 30 years or so of him setting it up, would go on to form the Royal Society. They would kind of come out of the shadows. We're talking about people like Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, Christopher Wren. They would rebuild London after it burnt down in 1666. You know, that invisible college became very visible, turned into the Royal Society, and kind of established the paradigm of science, natural philosophy, as we still understand it, pretty much. You know, they had their influence on thought, thinking, science, and tech. Tech is can't be overemphasized. But the Invisible College, who are the subject of this comic, we're understanding that, you know, of course, yeah, and more recently, or kind of like in the 70s, you've got like Jacques Vallée, Alan Hynek, Andrzej Puharich, who are like the kind of the key UFO researchers of like the kind of the nascent UFO research period, who have kind of become cult figures in their own right now. I think most of them still alive. And Jacques Vallée, who's kind of like their leader, talks about the way that, and this is quite relevant to the Invisibles as they're figured in the comic, people whose study of paranormal effects kind of changes their perspective, which is like, you know, basically shifts them into slightly more animistic or holistic understandings of the world, like eco-consciousness and stuff, which is kind of like a gloss, we think, for they get psychic powers. Yeah, they learn how to do remote viewing and clever thought stuff, like the Invisibles, right? Like the guys in the comic, they learn magic powers by studying these forbidden or under the radar, literally, UFO-ish topics. Mary seems to know, and it's important to remember that this was kind of like the subject of talk in the late 18th century, the Invisibles, the early 19th century and the 18th century. The Illuminati were just talked about. People were like, do you know what's going on with these revolutions? It's the Illuminati. They are trying to overthrow the church and the kings, and what the hell are we going to do about it? And it worked in America and France. As we've already heard from Etienne beforehand, they thought that they were kind of pulling the strings of the Jacobins, as he put it. That the Invisibles were the Illuminati. The terms are pretty interchangeable, really. Were kind of unleashing the forces of the revolution, which then got away from them. Yeah. But nevertheless, this thought, like a kind of a constructivist, I guess, or like a structuralist understanding of why, like a social sciences understanding of why revolutions happen, is maybe more useful. But no, it was a bunch of, if you want to kind of locate that power back in the individual, you've got influential guys like Cagliostro, Saint-Germain, Mary Shelley, working behind the scenes to change society. Like I say, they can be doing it either on the public level, like you saw in the Terror, and that's kind of what Etienne's talking about, or you could do it on the domestic level, like the familial level, which is kind of why Mary is being highlighted here with her children. Although arguably, you know, Mary Shelley was more of a legend than any of them because she wrote the best book that any of them did as well. So there's a risk here, right, in being this thing, and also like there's a risk for everyone because the things they unleash can go further than they think and create mountains of severed heads, which the Invisible that we speak to here, Etienne, previously claims to not want to have seen. You know, he's got squeamish about it. It's gone too far for him for his radical but not that radical sensibilities. But yeah, the Invisible College is what the comic's about. We could see it going back into history. The comic is saying these guys were responsible for the revolutions, but they weren't in control of it just because they were responsible for it. I don't know whether we're supposed to think that anyone is in control of it at this point, or whether this is like a chaos thing, whether it is literally just the momentum of the forces themselves that were unleashed that created the mountain of heads, or whether there was a thing there. Obviously, it could be that there was a thing there because the Cyphermen, remember, are happy to be eating all this stuff, and they've travelled back in time to go and enjoy themselves. On to page 16 and 17. Really, your feed with us. Come feed. They're called Cyphermen. It sounds a bit like Cybermen. They are very much like Doctor Who baddies. They've got effective but cheap like outfits. These are like isolation outfits that look a bit Gestapo. They look a bit fetish. They look a bit. They got gas masks on. It's a cool look, but also it's one that a BBC production department could manage, right? Without spending too much money. So they are very Doctor Who-y. But they look quite cool. But they don't seem to be, and they're using mind control stuff. We're going to zip past these 3 pages quite quickly because basically what we've got here is a pretty boring fight scene. It's not necessarily Jill Thompson's strength, a fight scene or a shootout scene, and she doesn't do a bad fist of it, but it's the least stuff happening 4 pages that we've had in all 6 issues. So the Marquis de Sade is kind of going, he's going, look at these, what a case of jewels is here. And he's looking at a woman's body that's been kind of split open. What a case of jewels is here unlatched, a known landscape of soft rubies. I've imagined the human body. He would have a French accent, but I can't really do that as easily. The female body is subject to every outrage, but to see this here real. I think he's a bit too overcome by the sight of this dead body. He was in the 7 Years' War. I reckon he's seen loads of dead bodies. And not just like dead ones, but like open ones. And not just male ones, but female ones too. I don't think this is too unusual for him. But they're kind of using it to tempt him, basically. They know that this kind of high perversion is going to get the Marquis de Sade onto their side, basically. There's obviously the Marquis de Sade's spirit is somewhat up for grabs at this point because of the atmosphere created by the mass sacrifices that are happening in the street. The Invisibles and the other side are both looking to rescue the spirit of the Marquis de Sade for their own reasons. Again, like there was a lot of stuff about like Tory like perversion. I don't mind, but like the way that the tabloid spread it is that one of the things that was bad about the Tory party, who remember were on their way out at this point, not for long enough, unfortunately, were a bunch of sick perverts who kept dying in autoerotic asphyxiation accidents and stuff. This kind of like understanding of human sexuality can go 2 ways. It can go into the hedonistic, having a good time, Invisible's way, or you can become a Tory MP who dies shamefully, right? And I think that's what the battle is for here. But the Cyphermen want to capture the Marquis de Sade as much as the Invisibles do, and they're using the kind of the obscenity of a woman's not just dead, but like sexually opened body, violently opened body, to kind of appeal to his lusts. But King Mob bursts in, bollocks! Kicks a door in, shoots one of the Cyphermen with his Ghostbuster. Over a page, page 18, he does it again. Then Boy helps, and they get the last one. And all 3 Cyphermen have been wiped away, and now the Marquis de Sade is faced. And it's not a bad action scene, but it's really not worth remarking on. The Marquis de Sade is left facing our Invisibles, and we've learned that the Invisibles can are not being seen for who they are because of the people, consensus reality, people's brains rewriting the way they look, all of that stuff it's a classic, again, Doctor Who-y sort of explanation for why the people who are time travelers don't have to be wearing contemporary dress. We presume that the Marquis de Sade, because he's kind of a little bit in the head, can probably see them for the way they really are, and he's finding them a bit surprising because he's probably not seen many black women before, and he definitely hasn't seen many Scousers before. And then we kind of jump out of the narrative a bit, and we've got this italics Though it's really unclear, and it's not important. It's just the narrator. It's just the narrative speaking at this point. This italics kind of thing, history lesson thing about what's going on with the revolution, and the guillotine, and the bodies, and the executions, and the sacrifices. And it's great. It's really good. Sort of like hallucinotropic poet, like comic book poetry. We've got the baying crowds again. You know, this whole page here, page 20, is really good. What do we say about it though? So it kind of speaks for itself. It's all fairly, there on the page. The stuff about, you know, it was thought that like the body of the new state would have to be born from the neck of the dead king, and you know would have to be kind of be reinforced. And it's true, right? You don't create futures without creating them, and different forms of, and clearing a way to create space to create them in. I think the most important, so read this page because it tells you a lot about stuff and it's really good. But the most important thing is, but the bit that's hiding on the page, which you're not meant to see, here's a shadow of Lady Liberty. There's some interesting, you know, I don't think it's terribly relevant, but there's a lot of interesting thinking about where this figure of Liberty, like the Statue of Liberty, who obviously there's one in Paris and there's one in Hudson Bay, very famously, a bigger one in Hudson Bay. It's completely in shadow here, so we're noticing it because this is remember, shadows is a thing at the moment for us, and it's interesting to kind of reflect in like a kind of a comparative mythological way who Lady Liberty is. It's not really relevant to the comics, so I'm not going to go into that. But but feel free to get on Google. The most important, this is the most important panel, because this woman who's just being taken up to the guillotine says, "O Liberty, how many are the crimes committed in thy name?" And that's a real quotation. There's another version of it which says something like, "O Liberty, what cruel jests you play," or something. What cruel ironies you commit, or something like that. But yeah, how many are the crimes committed in thy name, while the crowd bathes for her blood? This woman's name is Roland. She is Orlando, right? Madame Roland. She was like a saloniste and a politician and a kind of pretty awesome woman in revolutionary times. She was, she was basically a melt. She was basically a centrist or kind of a moderate bourgeoisie type, not really happy to hand over too much power to the sans-culottes at the time. And for that, she basically got her head cut off. She kind of just made too many of the wrong enemies. This happened later on in 1793. It's not actually happening contemporaneously, but the narrative tells you that it's not meant to be happening contemporaneously by this time. But she's Orlando. Her name is Madame Roland. Roland is the same word as Orlando. So we don't want her to lose her life because she was an impressive woman, like a cool woman, really. But like I say, a melt, and she got her head cut off for it. But the fact that she's here now is showing us how we know that Orlando is basically like the baddies, the people who aren't the Invisibles are using Orlando, and that they also were using her back at this point with her kind of like hugely impressive political and rhetorical skills and reputation and political chicanery. The forces of control were using her because she's Orlando. But she got her head cut off, and that was kind of maybe part of the thing, was that Madame Roland died, and either her death was part of her evil boss's plan, it was part of the Invisible's plan, or it was part of no plan. It was just a thing because, like we keep saying, these forces of revolution got too big, and or not got too big, but just got beyond anyone's control. And Madame Roland wasn't anti-revolutionary. She was quite the reverse. She was a radical for in a certain phase, but not radical enough. But then again, when you're faced with all these mountains of heads, what's radical really how radical are you gonna feel? But she was Orlando, right? She was Orlando. And then we've got more of our fine women here, our heroes, our tricoteuses, who are knitting the new society together. There's another bit here that's kind of happening, and you see it in the crowd. Like, obviously, like Jill Thompson's doing brilliant crowd work in this episode. It happens here, and it happens here, and it relates to the 90s moment when we were beginning to realise that the cognitive economy and the attention economy and the kind of the consumer witness economy was going to be the thing that one expressed one's function within the political economy of the sort of 21st century nation state by looking at a screen. These guys are doing an early model of that. The modern state that they're creating in France obviously is meant to be meaningful for the 90s reader who's reading this comic, and that's it, is the blank face watching TV, or as it would become, the smartphone or the tablet. That's what this is about as well. So we're supposed to think that they're creating the kind of the 19th, 18th, 19th century French state, but actually they're knitting together something even longer lasting and more pernicious than that, which is right where you're sitting now. Over the page, absolute vertigo. We've got a cool advert for some. It's another in-house advert for some more Vertigo stuff. It's like a little sampler basically, but it does include an exclusive 6-page Invisible story by Grant Morrison and Duncan Fegredo. There's King Moblet, and that's not a picture from any of the comics it's not a picture from this comic. It's or from any of the ones we've seen. That's its own strip. So King Mob had a little side story in this other book that Vertigo are putting out for 99 cents, like a sampler, like a preview of their upcoming projects. I don't know where mine's gone. I'm pretty sure I've lost it, and that I'm going to have to find a new one. Because that 6-page story by Grant Morrison and Duncan Fegredo, it's going to cover the kind of the Tory sex scandal stuff that I was talking about a minute ago with relation to the Marquis de Sade. So I am going to have to cover it, and but I'm also going to have to lay my hands on a copy of this somehow. So I don't know when that's going to be. That'll be we'll do that as its own episode. And over the page, meanwhile, while the baying mob is kind of, creating a passive consumerist future to live in, the Invisibles are back on their, much more important issue of rescuing the ghost of the Marquis de Sade, as I said before, which kind of seems dumb. So they explain it. We're going to take a psychic projection of you back with us to the 20th century. You'll be like a ghost there, but when you reach the end of your life here, you'll unite with your future projection. I know it sounds ridiculous, but trust me. Well, it does a little, but also, I don't. That's kind of the point for me where the metaphor here of the separation of the artist and the art breaks down. I don't know what that reunification bit's meant to mean. Anyway, turns out the Cyphermen didn't even have a woman's body kind of on the slab to turn the Marquis on with, but it was just a little rat, and like the rat that he'd maybe even the same rat that he'd seen in the room a few moments before. And they were using elf generators to make him think it was a sexy thing. He'd probably fuck her out there, wouldn't he? Why not? Then they get a psychic warning, and they're like, "Look, Jack's really not very well." Robin has a psychic flash saying, "Hey, something's wrong." Fanny agrees, "Yeah, I can feel the web strands twitching all the way back to the windmill." I think something, and Robin says, "I think something's trying to interfere with our return. They've shut down our re-entry gate. This is serious." Okay. And then it gets brilliant, honestly. I mean, just when this comic's kind of pissing me off a bit, the heroes get trapped in a postcard. So apparently the time machine's being disrupted at the other end. Not sure what that's about, but King Mob thinks they can fix it by taking a fix on the image of the postcard in his pocket. Remember the postcard of Les Bergères d'Arcadie from last week? The Poussin picture that kind of set a lot of this off for Byron and Shelley. it's a good strong image. We can take a fix on that and use it to project ourselves back to the center of the mandalum. It sort of makes sense. The mandalum is basically just like the kind of the energetic web pattern thing that is kind of being created and facilitating their psychic time travel. I probably, you know what a mandala is. You're not daft. Very key to like the Hindu mythology that kind of underpins the Bhagavad Gita stuff in the the Dalang section that we had in the previous episode. Plus, good old bit of Jungian psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry. Jack's like, fucking want to get out of here, man, and they do. They even kind of take the ghost of the Marquis de Sade back with them, but they don't. But they're not there. They haven't landed back in the windmill. They've landed back literally inside the painting, inside the postcard that King Mob had in his pocket. This is like a total Doom Patrol riff that I love. It comes out of nowhere, and we'll get into that more next week. And we're going to find out. Next time. And we're going to find out a bit about why the shadow thing is important when we look a bit more closely at the Poussin painting that they're now stuck in. Grant Morrison wrote a comic before. There's like a kind of a kooky superhero comic called the Doom Patrol, and they just get trapped in paintings all the time. And this is like meant to be a bit sort of neo-realist. The Invisibles, right? But nah, they get trapped in paintings and stuff. It's brilliant. It really uses that. It really has its cake and eat it as a bit of comics. Yeah, it can convince you that it's being kind of streetwise and edgy, and also just be as plainly daft as that within the same issue. It's great. It's really great. Over the page, we've got an advert for Starman number 5. Starman, James Robinson's Starman, which was like a kind of like the mainstream DC Sandman book that was running, God blimey, a long time ago in the 90s, from like 1994 to, I guess, probably finished in about 2001 or something. What have we got here? We've got the Silver Age Starman fighting the 90s noughties Starman, who is his cousin, brother. And there's a Shakespeare quote. Maybe this has got something to tell us. "'Tis now the very witching time of night, when churchyards yawn and hell itself breathes out contagion to this world." I should know that. I'm going to say Macbeth because it's got witches in it, and I'm lazy. They're having there's like a zombie 90s Starman having a fight with Silver Age Starman while this angel kind of watches on and Shakespeare's talking. I've probably read this issue, but because I'm pretty sure I've read all of that run of Starman, which had a lot to recommend it. Like a kind of like somebody being let loose on DC's kind of like golden and silver age superheroes. So that's the superheroes from like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then like the 60s. But kind of taken in a kind of a serious way. My memory of it now is that the 90s Starman was like steampunk, had these kind of rubbish goggles, and was like kind of a slightly annoying hipster, basically. Lived in like a Pacific Northwest town, city, kind of like a bit like Seattle, but not Seattle, kind of Opal City, I think it's called, and was like well into, he ran like a vintage antique shop kind of thing where he sold like old radios, and kind of would talk at great length about how this make of old radio is different to that one. I used to I definitely liked it for a bit. I definitely did. I'm sure there's gems in there, but a bit like Sandman, which also has gems in it. The kind of the air of self-satisfaction which permeates it now makes me unlikely to ever go back to it. But if you're at all interested in slightly off-key but still sort of mainstream superheroes, Starman by Tony Harris and James Robinson was one that's worth picking up, definitely, or worth thinking about. Witching time of night, when churchyards yawn and hell itself breathes out contagion to this world. Maybe this is nicely punctuated with our windmill here, as we return to the windmill, densely draped in forest shadow, and our guys are kind of waking up and kind of not waking up. The candles are out, the sun is up, their little time travel adventure to revolutionary France is somewhat over. And look who's there, having got he got the tip off when we saw him last time. Orlando, the scary devil guy, is there. Where does he keep getting this information from? But he's hot on their tail. He's found them. And there's this... I don't know, I think this page is maybe a bit clumsy. But it's all right because it's kind of gross, and that's good. But, you know, back in revolutionary France, the heads are being chopped off. And here in the windmill, bits of Jack are being chopped off. Ow! Jack's fingers getting clipped off with garden shears. Bit by bit by bit. So we're supposed to, yeah. So each one of these bodies is like is the construction of the modern French state, and you know, the modern world, which entraps us so and does, which alienates us so. This kind of we could even assume that this might be Madame Roland getting her head chopped off there, and this being of course Orlando now doing the chopping. I think that's the thing here, is that we're meant to be thinking about how quickly. You know, as if it wasn't clear enough from now, how quick from this issue, how quickly goodies can flip into baddies. Yeah, how the kind of the benign requirements of political change that became the French Revolution turned into murder. So it's like, and you know, like Etienne was bemoaning earlier, the Invisibles started the revolution, but it seems like something else is in charge of it now. Some kind of beastly, perhaps some kind of Archon, and your Rolands can seem to be well, they're both doing the same thing, right? Even though this Roland is getting cut and Orlando here is doing the cutting, as I say, they're both parts of the mechanism that's creating the alienated control world that we've got now, and that and that we had then, and that the Invisibles are fighting against. It's kind of pleasing in its like the kind of the chopping is a bit too on the nose, but the there's a pleasing kind of drawing of lines there between those things, right? The kind of this knowledge that things can flip quickly, and that you shouldn't be too sure who's on whose side or who's in control of events at any given time, if indeed it's anyone, and the Roland or the Orlando, whether sacrificed or sacrificing, contribute to the process the same. Yeah, does that make sense? I'm really concerned that I haven't made much sense through all of this, and I've kind of skipped over the lives of Saint-Germain and Cagliostro, which is super, super interesting. And, you know, they were definitely Illuminati guys, and as I said, the people were aware of the Illuminati kind of being behind the French Revolution and doing it, and there's arguments about how much evidence there is for their involvement, but they're a secret society. They're not going to leave loads of evidence around. Rumour is good evidence in my view in this kind of case, and there is kind of, if you've got access to Masonic libraries, my understanding is that there are documents that kind of say, yeah, Cagliostro met so and so who kind of came from, you know, the Bavarian Weishaupt Bavarian Illuminati Lodge. That these kind of contacts and connections can be made, can be kind of verified as much as anything can, you know. Next, and that's the end of the issue. And like I say, yeah, it's a weird, bumpy kind of mid-arc issue. Yeah, there's other stuff I could have gone on about the Godwin and Shelley families. We'll do that. We'll do that when we get to the kids. But that's it. That's the end of the issue. It's not quite the end of the podcast because we've still got the letters page and a couple more adverts. But that was that was the issue. There's a lot to kind of get your head around there. There's a lot to disagree with, and there's a lot, certainly if you're making a podcast about it, to get wrong. You know I started the podcast saying that the issue, the comic maybe gets a few things wrong here, and it kind of does, but only because it's got such a broad, because it's trying to do so much. It's got such a broad scope, and you know, no matter what the comic gets wrong, you could be damn sure that the podcast is going to get an equal amount wrong. For which I kind of apologise, I guess. I think, although I spoke to one of my buddies about it in between the last filming session and this one, and he was like, man, don't worry about it, and so I'm not. But maybe there's a case to be made for opening this up, these arcs, you know, the entire process. Maybe your voices, if you're watching this, I mean, I can't imagine, but if there's anyone, maybe maybe dialogue here would help. Maybe chatting it over would help. So that's a seed that I'd like to sow at this point without really mentioning any more for now, because I might not get around to it. But a comment, say, interact here, and tell me what you think this issue's about, and I promise I'll try and give a decent response, or maybe even do a sideshow, maybe even do like a side episode which deals with some of your bits, and maybe we could do a Skype chat, something like that, maybe. But yeah, let me know. Do let me know. Okay, onto the letters page. Invisible ink. Blah blah blah. Ryan Hughes did the cover. Oh, Ryan Hughes did the cover. No, he didn't. It's signed Sean 94. It's a boring cover, but it does look more designy than drawny. So maybe, but it's signed, so it's not. It wasn't Ryan Hughes. Surely it was Sean Phillips. Okay, so there's a wee mistake there. We're pretty sure. The logo design is by Ryan Hughes. We know that. Okay, first letter. Yeah, the first letter is interesting because he basically goes, the letter writer, Rux Hensley of Loves Park, cool address, Illinois. He kind of goes, hey, this is like the Illuminati, right? And he talks about the assassins, the Roshanaya, and it's like, yeah. Morrison's reply doesn't say nope at all. It's like, yeah, and it is like this. You realise now, and it has been obvious, but I didn't really realise that the comic and Morrison himself were so uninterested in denying it. But it's basically just Illuminatus by Robert Anton Wilson again, and they've changed the title slightly. Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea, I should say. Sorry, it's not just Robert Anton Wilson, obviously. But this is kind of it. Secret society of freewheeling, acid tripping, goody guys having a good time against the baddies who want only them and nobody else to have a good time. Next letter comes from Michael O. something. Apparently he's got bad handwriting. Who represents the Anarchy Press, all caps, from Bellingham. Where's that? Washington? Yeah, Washington. So he's in the Pacific Northwest too. I read the first two issues of Les Invisibles, so that little bit of French that he's creeping in there is telling that it appeared in this issue. Knights Templar, blah 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 blah. Knights Templar magic-y stuff. Extraterrestrial allies. Yeah, just a kind of a fun little letter. Nothing too. Oh yeah, he says, yeah, I've been writing this comic, or like this is the same story as me. But as I just said, it's just Illuminatus, the Illuminatus trilogy, which is, I don't know, if you read it, it's a lot like a prose version of the kind of music that I think is trying to emulate, which is to say, not terribly good to go back to, although kind of mind blowing first time round. If you're young enough, I guess. I was very young when I read it, and it did definitely blow my mind. But I've tried to read it since, and kind of. It's like the Grateful Dead, yeah? You get what I'm saying? It's like some of those workouts, some of those riffs, they probably felt better writing than in the writing than in the reading. Loads of good stuff in there, but also some style issues. Yes, style, yeah. It's not stupid, although some of it is just kind of wrong. But yeah, not terribly listenable, should we say. Graham Parker from Northeast England says he was getting well fed up with conspiracy theories. Even the most, they seem so limited by their own relevance. God bless comic book letter writers. They're always so much cleverer than everyone else. Even the most comprehensive is centered around a group of strange happenings without any conclusions ever being drawn. Lots of people nod their heads in agreement that something is going on, but other than that, they're futile. That's why I was happy when you said in Invisibles #1 that you were going to reveal the big picture. Decisive, brash, and completely shameless, yeah. We're all part of this conspiracy called called life. Democracy is not an artistic precept. Invisibles is extremely versatile, malleable even. I think Magic as a tool for survival. No pointy hats allowed. Have I blabbed enough? I think so. Bye. Blab all you like, Graham. This is Blab Suitor. Yeah, I mean, Graham had probably had a can or two before he wrote that letter, and it's a bit freewheeling, but it's likable. That's what we're getting from these. That's what we're getting from these letters pages. Is that the kind of the fun guys are writing I mean, they're a bit at themselves still because they like comics, but they're writing in now, like people have caught the vibe 6 issues in and are writing letters, and the letters are just like blah, 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 I'm just writing a letter because I like the comic and it's good times, right? And it's like it's just to write the letter and send it in, and Grant Morrison will say cheers dude at the end. Next one is from Alexander Wheel, brilliant surname, Wheill. He's from Greenfield Park in Quebec. I can't help feeling a little bit cheated, relieved. Yes, what was I cheated? The hype about the comic led me to believe I'd be reading the adventures of a weirded out bunch of odd-looking goofballs. How relieved I am that my impression was wrong. However, now I'm reading philosophy lessons from a balding bum, directed to a snotty-nosed, slacker, pissed-off young man who doesn't seem to care much about the old man's lessons. Yes, as you already know, I hate Dane with a passion not unlike apathy. But Alexander, passion is unlike apathy. Anyway, I'm even getting fed up with Tom and Bedlam. The characters are really starting to piss me off. Yet their growing relationship, along with their lessons of life, is breathtaking. I've never felt so compelled to read stories involving characters that drive me mad, yet intrigue me. How odd. There is a lifiness to Dane and Tom's relationship that does get over the fact that Dane's an annoying kid and Tom's like a smelly pisshead. Neither of those things are bad things, but also being in their company for 4 issues straight would be a hassle if they didn't have this lovely bond, which you could actually see growing in the comic, and that's all part of the cleverness of the comic, really. My whole point is, I think we're all egocentric bastards. This is Alexander still. My whole point is that I think we're all egocentric bastards who refuse to accept we're evil, even if our actions only prove that we are basically nasty. I think Alexander might be nasty. But he was probably young. He's probably all right now. Grant Morrison's reply is, I don't think we're evil at all, Alexander, just stupid and scared. And some of us have more power than stupid, scared people can be trusted with. Which, difficult to disagree with that. Next letter is by Mark Hayden Fraser. I've got a funny feeling that name is a little bit familiar. And the Mark Hayden Fraser was another letter hack. Remember Charles J. Sperling from a previous letters page, the kind of people who just write letters to comic book letters pages. Mark Hayden Fraser, the reason that his name rings a bell isn't necessarily because of his name, but because of his address. He comes from a town in Wisconsin called Oconomowoc, which is a brilliant name. That's a brilliant name. He likes the comic. He's read other comics before, you can tell. I'm hoping Grant Morrison's name alone will be enough to stave off the walls of mediocrity from either lessening the message of and/or discontinuing this series. Mark Hayden Fraser has got a good instinct for comics. He can tell when a comic is maybe not going to connect with a big enough audience to survive. And that's what we've got here. And he's intuited it because he's a smart cookie. Well done, Mark Hayden Fraser. But he's got some questions. The best bit about letters pages in comic books is questions. You do number 1, bracket, ask a question. Number 2, bracket, ask a question. And, all being well, you get the editor will answer them. Yeah, so you can find out stuff and get a good answer. Like, who would win a fight between the Punisher and Wolverine, right? Before we get there, because we'll just go through them one after another. So this is interesting. So, part of Mark's thing is, he says, it's an old cliche. Bring the new recruit close to hopelessness and death, and then yank him back. In the process, making him feel the joy and beauty of being alive. Making him see everything with new eyes, if you will. And what the hell it works. Simple brainwashing techniques aside, and he goes on. And Morrison kind of takes issue with that and says, for nod yourself, another Robert Anton Wilson Illuminatus nod. I wouldn't agree that Dane was brainwashed. As far as I'm concerned, breaking down buried psychological blocks, such as those surrounding Dane's long-suppressed feelings for his absent dad, is a deconditioning strategy rather than a brainwashing technique. Potato, potato. I can vouch for this, as I've had it done to me quite recently by a therapist using a system based partly on the theories of Wilhelm Reich. Reich believed that traumatic and emotionally unresolved experiences are stored in the body, where they manifest themselves in the form of recurring health problems, such as asthma, migraine, chronic muscular armoring, and even cancer and heart disease. Release of the tensions locked up in our bodies unfreezes the withheld emotions, and we re-experience and integrate the original hurtful event. This leads to a release of bound-up energy with corresponding feelings of well-being and bliss. It also breaks the cycle of pointlessly repetitive behavioural and emotional patterns. It was reading this where I went, hang on, did I find out everything that I knew about Wilhelm Reich from this letters page? Maybe. And then I reflected that I have actually read 2 of Wilhelm Reich's books. I've read the one about fascism, and I've read the one called Listen, Little Man, which they had in my sixth form library when this came out, and I found it and read it because of this little bit. It's a bit, it's that kind of American-oid, because Reich wasn't American, but he was kind of in America. You just kind of exhort, you just rant and the people listen, kind of thing. The stuff about emotional repression leading to fascism, I think that's pretty right on. Reich was a wrong one. He was a homophobe, and whenever anybody talks about the way that you've just got to kind of release the sexual impulses of the children, like, big red flag. Yeah. So that definitely doesn't justify what was done to Reich, I don't think, unless he practiced those theories, in which case I really don't care. But the US government does hate his ideas. They hate orgone, the idea that you would have, the bioforce kind of recontextualized in a American psychiatric, therefore, somewhat scientific frame. They weren't having that. And also, you can use Reichian therapy to chill out. And he was violently suppressed by the US government in 1956, as Morrison says here. And then, so that is all really interesting. And Reich is a martyr figure of some respect, but he's like, people are complex and nuanced, and he had a dark side too. And then he goes, "Don't worry about the Invisibles not selling as much as Sandman. What does?" Good point. Okay. The Arcadia story, and then this is Morrison still. The Arcadia storyline is as difficult as the book will get. So if people can handle this, they shouldn't have too much trouble with the upcoming feast of gore, guns, bombs, and metaphysics. Now, I enjoyed this comic and plenty, and at the time and now, and I don't know if I can handle it though. I'm not sure if that's my fault or the comics, but there's a lot going on here. This is quite heavy, difficult stuff. Because it's just throwing so much stuff out, and there maybe isn't a coherence or a kind of or like a intentional pattern. Although I think there's lots of interesting kind of hidden patterns. Maybe it's okay to have not handled this, is what I'm saying, because I think this is the point where it's really throwing stuff at the wall, and we're finding out how much sticks. Okay, but he does do what a good old Grant Morrison. He does do what you're meant to do, which is the letter has question 1, question 2, question 3, and you answer them question 1, question 2, question 3, and we're going to do that. We're going to do that here. So, Mark Hayden Fraser's question 1: I've seen King Mob before. Where? Answer 1. The King Mob character appeared in some of my earliest published and unpublished work under his real name. We'll get to that. He has since shaved his head and taken to wearing clothes you may have seen in fetish magazines like Skin 2 and *O*. Shaved heads are cool, we know that. Question 2. Ragged Robin is Crazy Jane, yes? 2. I'm not allowed to answer this one for copyright reasons. Crazy Jane belongs to DC, Ragged Robin belongs to me. But I'm sure you've thought long and hard about what happened to Kay Chalice after she left Danny the World. So that's more Doom Patrol referencing, right? I was talking about them just a second ago with regard to getting trapped in a painting. One of them escaped a painting and kind of... that's misreading. I won't say that. But yeah, Ragged Robin's whole look and kind of kookiness is very much like Jane. Question 3. When are you going to start pushing those blank badges on the public, sowing even more confusion and discord? 3. Blank badges. Answer. Blank badges are cheap and easy to make. Go to it. Send me a blank badge. If you're watching this and you've got one, send it to me. Question 4. Please tell me that lobster men from Venus aren't behind all this, okay? Wow. Jordan Peterson alert, 25 years early. 4. They're not lobster men and they're not from Venus. But that would imply that something crustaceanoid and extraplanetary are exciting stuff. Okay, and the final letter in this issue on this letters page is, as I mentioned him just a moment ago, it's from the one and only Charles J. Sperling of Flushing, Queens, as I looked at myself, New York. He has spotted the prisoner reference. Oh, I didn't get this one. He spotted a reference to the Invisibles in the Invisibles number 3 to the prisoner, KAR120C. That's the license plate on the prisoner's car and on the car in the Invisibles 3. So there you go. There's another one that, the Anthony Newley version of Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush that Orlando is probably listening to in this issue. That song, Pop Goes the Weasel, features in, definitely one episode of The Prisoner. I think the penultimate one, the one where he's like in the classroom being interrogated by Leah McKern, and maybe it's in another one as well. So yeah, prisoner F's abounding, and quite neatly hidden. Jean-Luc Godard, Raymond Durand, don't know who that is. Underground work. The couple had to prepare. Parts of it didn't make sense. The couple who had to prepare the hand of glory here. Do you remember the weird folk that Dane and Tom see in the churchyard? The fox hunting crew who made a fool of Dane McGowan but stopped short of killing him. Why? Because if they had, then he wouldn't get a chance to clean their clocks later, would he? So Charles J. Sperling, one of the brightest comics readers in the known universe, at the time had missed what, in retrospect, was quite obvious, that the fox hunters chasing Dane were our invisible dudes. And Tom on Cities sounded either brilliant or bullshit ridden. My money was on bullshit ridden. Find an island or place in the country if you don't like cities. But Dane's flight as a pigeon rang true. And Tom's assault on the young man being cruel to be kind was splendid, and you could almost believe that there was something to this Invisibles business. Certainly enough to brave Jack Frost and come back from number 4. While I'm not wild about underground works, I'm willing to give them my time, especially when they are Grant Morrison's. Steve Yoa's artwork was clean, simple, and exciting. Definitely visionary, which is what the story required. And Daniel Vozzo's colouring made the whites and the blacks sting almost as hard as the grey-blue of the whipping on page 3, panel 1. Good work also came from Electric Crayon and Clem Robbins, and word has it that the Marquis de Sade is coming our way soon. He is, Charles, he was. Have a mirror on me, and take care of yourselves. Thank you for your time. And then he gets a nice, yeah, the Hand of Glory scene will turn up later, says Grant Morrison. He obviously really likes Charles Sperling, and as well you might, because he writes very decent letters, very thoughtful and fair and honest and appropriate. And we love Charles J. Sperling. He's probably the hero of this comic. Okay, next issue. Cruelty, perversion, degradation, innocence defiled, and vice triumphant. Welcome to the wonderful world of the Marquis de Sade, as the Invisibles endure 120 days of Sodal. I think you know how much I struggled with this one. I think I'm going to really struggle with the next one. I think I'm way too old and uptight to overlook some of the stuff in that, if it's anything like I remember it now. But we'll see. So, okay, what else we got? We've got John Constantine holding a baby. I don't know, the baby is maybe, the modern state, post-revolutionary France, don't know what the baby being born in this issue could be. We've got the same advert for the Elric books and the Dark Destiny Gothic horror advert that we had last time from White Wolf Fiction. Andy Helfer from Paradox Press, I think I mentioned this beforehand, right? I think I mentioned this either last issue or last episode or the one before. Andy Helfer was the group editor of Paradox Press, who did the Big Book of books. For instance, the Big Book of Urban Legends, the Big Book of Conspiracy Theories. As I said, those are great. Get them if you can. Okay, so what came out? Anything interesting came out? We've got Doom Patrol by Rachel Pollack and Ted McKeever. Mark Miller on Swamp Thing. The Sandman is still going on. Issue number 67. Animal Man coming back with Jerry Prosser, Fred Harper, and Jason Temujin. Don't know that. I haven't read any of that. Black Orchid Mobfire. Shade on issue 56. So where's that with Shade? Shade was like the best of the Vertigo comics in many ways. Early Vertigo comics. I think by issue, but it was only really good for about 20 issues. Only like super duper hyper good for about 20 issues. And I think by issue 56 it's arguably moved past that a little bit. Eddie Campbell and Sean Phillips on Hellblazer. I should have said before, but this picture of Constantine on the mail order advert is a Sean Phillips joint. Not that he's smoking one, that's just a silk cut. Jonah Hex, Ghost Dancing, and on the back page, ready for your dead time story, Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight. I don't know if I've even seen this. I don't even know if it was released under that name in this here country. But it's great. It looks brilliant. It features songs by Pantera, Megadeth, Ministry, the Rollins Band, and the Gravediggers, so there is actually a good band there. Demon Knight. It's like a portmanteau kind of thing, I presume. Maybe not, because it's only got one director. Executive produced by Richard Donner, David Giler, Walter Hill, Joel Silver, and Robert Zemeckis. Good names. Stars Billy Zane, William Sadler, don't know who that is. Jada Pinkett before she became Jada Pinkett Smith. Brenda Bucky, CCH Pounder, is that her real name? And Thomas Hayden Church. Who's Thomas Hayden Church? Was he That's not Anakin Skywalker, is it? Who's Thomas Hayden Church? Comment below. But it looks great. So you've got the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt telling a story about, I don't know, like a kind of a doctor maybe with a briefcase. Are you ready for your dead time story? And it's called Demon Knight with a K. I haven't seen it. I bet it's brilliant. I will probably try and go on a mini mission to watch it now to see if it ties into this issue of The Invisibles. Note the King Mob John Lennon shades that the Crypt Keeper is wearing there. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to do that. That's a nice little side mission for me, isn't it? I'll enjoy that. That's it. We're done. I'm sorry that this one. Oh, hey, at least it was short, right? It was shorter. I think I haven't stitched it all together yet. Follow Patreon, comment below, say hello, tell your friends, tell your mum, get your mum to watch this. Yeah, get your mum to watch, not my mum. Get your mum to watch this. Like, how else are we going to change the world if we don't get your mums to watch podcasts about the Invisibles? What's going to happen, right? Do it. Next time, issue 7. Great times. Brilliant. I'll do better. Promise. Cheers. Bye.